Imagine seeing a familiar smiling face on your TV every night, a face you thought symbolized joy and trust. But what if I told you that behind that smile lies a dark secret no one ever saw coming? A secret tied to one of the most notorious human trafficking networks in U.S. history. Would you believe it? This isn't just a fictional story. This is the horrifying truth about Rick Harrison, the man so many once adored. A bloody truth, where every item on a pawn shop shelf could hide a shattered life, silenced, imprisoned, and sold like merchandise. And now a court has sentenced him to death. Want to know the truth behind it all? Drop a 1 in the comments if you sympathize with Rick Harrison, or a 0 if you feel otherwise. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next, because we're about to uncover every dark secret in this unbelievable story. It all began like any other day. The courthouse in downtown Las Vegas bustled with activity. Journalists lined up along the marble steps, audience members clutched coffee cups, and photographers checked their lenses for what many believed would be a routine sentencing hearing. But nothing about what happened that day was ordinary. Not the people inside, not the silence that swallowed the entire courtroom. And certainly not the verdict that would send shockwaves into every household that had ever watched the iconic Pawn Stars show on the History Channel. As Rick Harrison, the once beloved and witty patriarch of the gold and silver pawn shop, was led into the courtroom in chains, a strange tension filled the air. He didn't flash the smug smile fans had come to know. His usual swagger had been replaced with a cautious, almost haunted unease. His family wasn't there. No entourage, no supporters. Just a row of federal agents sitting directly behind the prosecution. The judge's gavel thundered as everyone took their place. A court officer read the charges once more, each syllable slicing through the room like a knife. Human trafficking, organized exploitation, international money laundering, unlawful detainment, severe abuse, conspiracy under federal racketeering law. Even then, some in the press believed it had to be a misunderstanding. After all, Rick Harrison was a household name. The cranky but lovable king of the pawn shop who once joked about customers trying to sell Elvis Presley's hair or fake Roman coins. He was reality TV royalty, a figure synonymous with Las Vegas culture. But no evidence? It was simply too horrifying. The court proceedings had been sealed for nearly 9 months. Rumors of a major investigation leaked through anonymous FBI tips, Reddit speculation, and cryptic social media posts. But no one, not even Rick's harshest critics, could have imagined the depth of what would eventually be revealed. Victim testimonies, forensic photos, smuggled ledgers, and surveillance footage were all laid bare in one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent memory. People always assume monsters look like crooked teeth, sunken eyes, or deformed faces. But what do you do when the monster smiles at you every Wednesday night on TV? When it signs autographs at Comic-Con and poses for selfies outside its shop on the Las Vegas Strip? What happens when evil doesn't lurk in shadows, but walks freely under the sun, wearing a button-up shirt and selling vintage guitars? The courtroom was packed, yet somehow it felt frozen in time. Even the click of a pen or the rustle of paper couldn't interrupt the silence. And then came the words that tore through the air like shrapnel. This court, Having reviewed all submitted evidence, considered the impact on the victims, and weighed the severity of the crimes, hereby sentences the defendant, Richard Kevin Harrison, to death by lethal injection. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. A woman cried out from the gallery. One juror dropped their notebook, and Rick Harrison, his hands still shackled at the waist, blinked, bowed his head, and said nothing. No protest, no final words, just silence. In that moment, everything changed. Outside, the media erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Social media exploded with disbelief, confusion, anger, and grief. Rick Harrison, death sentence began trending worldwide. Fans and followers were torn between denial and devastation. Some insisted it had to be a mistake or a setup. Others, especially survivors of trafficking who followed the case closely, said justice had finally been served. But the truth had been buried for years, hidden beneath Rick's carefully curated image, behind the noise of celebrity, masked by the glitter and glamour of Vegas lights. Behind the pawnshop counter was a man who, according to the FBI, was orchestrating something far more sinister than anyone ever imagined. Behind every "let me call in an expert" was a transaction that had nothing to do with artifacts and everything to do with human lives. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a tourist magnet drawing visitors from around the world, had become the unthinkable epicenter of a global criminal network. That very same shop, displaying rare coins and Civil War rifles, he was accused of laundering millions in dirty money through fake sales, false valuations, and offshore transfers. Underground rooms, once believed to be storage areas, were now called holding cells. The vintage security cameras fans thought were for show had captured horrors beyond anyone's imagination. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the FBI issued vague statements hinting at the scale of the operation. But court transcripts and witness testimony would fill in the blanks, detailing a complex, ruthless, and coldly efficient system, one that rivaled international criminal syndicates. So how did we get here? Rick Harrison, an American TV icon, a Las Vegas entrepreneur, a man with an estimated net worth of over $9 million, had gone from selling collectibles to facing the ultimate sentence reserved for only the most heinous crimes. This video will take you through the hidden corridors of that story. We'll revisit the secrets behind the investigation, the horrifying discoveries made during federal raids, and the heartbreaking testimonies from survivors who say they were trafficked through Rick's operations. We'll hear from former employees now living in hiding. We'll uncover a money laundering scheme involving fake antiques, shell companies, and casino dealings. We'll dive into the court's final decision and the emotional collapse that followed. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why the court made the unprecedented decision to sentence Rick Harrison to death. This isn't just a story about a fallen celebrity. It's a story of what happens when greed outweighs human life, when the systems we trust, culture, commerce, celebrity, can be twisted to conceal horror, and about the pain victims endured in silence for years, without being believed, until now. As we reach the final chapter, you may find yourself asking one haunting question. How many other monsters are still smiling on our screens? It's hard to reconcile the two images, one of Rick Harrison, The bald, bearded man with a sharp tongue and a witty catchphrase grinning under the warm lights of reality TV, posing with his son Corey and sidekick Chum Lee over a rare coin or vintage guitar. On the other side, the same man shackled and hunched in a federal courtroom, facing charges so horrific they feel torn from a Hollywood crime thriller. One man, two lives, a total collapse from icon to infamy. To understand why Rick Harrison now faces the death penalty, we must keep watching. His journey wasn't from pawn shop to prison, but from the character he carefully built to the reality he desperately tried to hide. And that journey began in the sun-drenched heart of Las Vegas in the early 2000s. Rick Harrison had already made a name for himself in Vegas's local business scene. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, founded with his father Richard the Old Man Harrison in 1989, grew from a modest storefront into a Vegas staple, wedged between adult shops and neon-lit diners along a rugged stretch of the city. Rick's business was unique. He didn't just buy and sell items, he dealt in stories. Every object had a tale, and Rick had a gift for turning even the dullest trinket into must-see TV. When Pawn Stars debuted on History Channel in 2009, it was an instant hit. Rick became the unexpected face of Americana. Bold yet knowledgeable, sarcastic but oddly charming, the show humanized the world of pawnbroking and added just enough humor to hook millions. Millions watched weekly. Tourists lined up outside the store. Merchandise flew off shelves. Rick was everywhere. TV interviews, talk shows, even book deals. But no one knew. Behind the scenes, Rick wasn't just brokering antique coins and Civil War relics. He was brokering something far darker, something that had nothing to do with collectibles and everything to do with control, manipulation, and profit at any cost. According to the FBI, around the time the show exploded in popularity, Rick's off-the-books activities intensified. Investigators believe his fame and perceived innocence created the perfect cover for a hidden empire, not built on artifacts, but on lives. To the public, Rick was self-made. He often told stories about dropping out of school due to epilepsy and building $1 million business from scratch. On TV, he played the no-nonsense businessman. But the show never revealed what lay behind the reinforced doors at the back of the pawn shop. Rick's downfall didn't start with a single mistake or damning evidence. It started with a whisper, a quiet complaint buried deep in government files, barely noticeable among more urgent issues. But it was enough to spark a seasoned agent's instinct, to pull a loose thread in a very dark, tangled web. In late 2021, FBI agent Daniel Price launched a personal investigation into the disappearance of 16-year-old Jenna Morales. She vanished from Reno, Nevada after applying for what seemed to be a legitimate modeling job found online, promising high pay, free travel, and work with celebrity-connected branding agencies. The ad looked professional. The sender was verified. There was even a shipping manifest. Everything seemed real until she disappeared. And the FBI began an exhausting search for answers. They followed a digital trail to a shell company based in Las Vegas, a business model built around recruiting young women on short-term contracts, only to sever all contact shortly after. No taxes, no payroll records, and no employees on paper. Agent Price had handled trafficking cases for years, But this one bothered him. The effort made to keep everything clean, the company's apparent legitimacy, and the abrupt dead ends. It all hinted at something much bigger. Then came the turning point. During a raid on a suspected safe house just outside Henderson, agents rescued several young women in varying states of trauma and discovered a brown envelope labeled "Client Invoices," tucked deep in a locked file drawer. Inside was a single receipt from RH Acquisitions LLC. At first, it seemed harmless, just an 1874 invoice for rare item transport and handling. But Agent Price had a gut feeling, and it wouldn't let him sleep. He ran the LLC through internal systems and databases. What he found was unexpected and disturbing. RH Acquisitions was linked to none other than Richard Kevin Harrison, Rick Harrison, the man from Pawn Stars. At first, it didn't make sense. Price thought he'd made a mistake, maybe someone with the same name, but cross-referencing company registration, mailing addresses, and linked accounts confirmed it. The LLC was owned and operated by Rick Harrison himself. Price hesitated. Could this be money laundering? A celebrity making bad financial decisions? But the deeper they dug, the stranger it became. RH Acquisitions wasn't alone. There were 5 other companies, all with similar themes: historical asset recovery, antique brokerage, rare acquisition consulting, some registered in Nevada, others in Delaware, and one in the British Virgin Islands. Most had no public websites, no listed offices, and no signs of legal business activity. That's when the FBI opened the official case file. The investigation into Rick Harrison quietly launched under the code name Operation Pale Pawn. Only a few agents were brought in at first, but as the scope widened, things became clear. They were up against a tightly organized system, something comparable to what they'd seen in major trafficking rings or black market artifact networks. The first challenge was staying covert. If Rick Harrison was involved in trafficking or laundering, the last thing the FBI wanted was for him to know he was being watched. The team had to operate with surgical precision, gathering intelligence without raising suspicion, mapping his entire network without being detected. And they succeeded. A digital forensic warrant enabled surveillance on secondary businesses, tied to shell companies, and placed separate listening devices on several suspects. What they uncovered chilled even the most seasoned agents. Conversations used coded terms referring to goods shipped in antique crates, discretionary condition, and final destination. One phrase kept surfacing: no history, no paper trail. It sounded like collector slang, but in the context of trafficking, it meant something much darker. Alongside audio surveillance, forensic accountants examined Rick Harrison's tax returns, bank records, and company filings. They discovered a murky income pattern, hundreds of thousands of dollars per quarter linked to casino accounts, private art buyers, and shady foreign nationals. Some large transfers led to Dubai, Serbia, and Thailand. Many deposits were structured below reporting thresholds, a textbook sign of money laundering. Then came the surveillance footage. Though the shop was wired for reality TV, Rick maintained a separate internal system. FBI agents reviewed weeks of stored video. The off-limits back room became a focal point. They saw dozens of people arriving at midnight, unmarked trucks unloading at the back door, paperwork exchanges, and boxes that never appeared in the retail section. One night, a white unmarked vehicle reversed into the dock. A man emerged and opened the rear doors. In the dim lighting, at least 4 hooded, bound, silent figures were visible. A shadow, Rick Harrison, briefly appeared on camera, nodded, signed a clipboard, and vanished inside. It was visual confirmation of what the data had hinted at. But one misstep could destroy the case. Rick was public, powerful, and resourceful. If he suspected anything, he could clean house fast. Undercover agents were embedded, one posing as a European supplier of rare textiles, another as a buyer interested in unorthodox acquisitions. Rick was cautious but probing. He never confirmed illegality, only dropped hints. "We don't sell items from a box store, you know what I mean?" Every meeting was recorded, every transaction logged. FBI began building a digital fortress of evidence: emails, banking logs, audio files, GPS data, and more. They even traced an $100 transfer to a European intermediary linked to the direct sale of a trafficked teenager. Whispers started in Vegas. A former janitor spoke anonymously to a local paper, describing strange smells, locked doors, and one night seeing a barefoot, terrified girl wandering the back hall. The story was swiftly buried, thanks to legal threats from Harrison's attorneys, but it was enough to alert a city council member, who pushed for a deeper review of Rick's business licenses. At the end of 2022, fate intervened. One of Rick's former partners, a European antique dealer, was arrested in Prague on human trafficking charges. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he handed over his entire client list. And near the top of that list was Rick Harrison. The gates blew open. With international cooperation now underway, the FBI, Interpol, and the Department of Homeland Security joined forces. They executed simultaneous raids on Rick's private warehouse, 2 linked offices, and the pawn shop itself. What they found would later be described in court as one of the most disturbing examples of organized trafficking hidden in plain sight. There were holding cells, surveillance setups, old passports, victim photos, and foreign currency. And most damning of all, a handwritten ledger, dated coded aliases, client notes, victim profiles reduced to entries like 63, female, 13, healthy, high value. Agents who discovered the ledger described it as the moment the case went from horrific to unforgettable. This wasn't just trafficking, it was commerce, a cold, calculated system, devoid of empathy. When the story hit the headlines, everything was illuminated. And for Rick Harrison, it marked the beginning of the end. The alleged personal involvement of Rick Harrison was just the tip of a horrifying iceberg. As investigators dug deeper, they realized this wasn't a lone wolf operation. It was a fully functioning international network. A global operation spanning continents linked to organized crime syndicates with logistics as refined as any Fortune 500 company. And at the center of it all stood a once-beloved businessman whose public image was clean, now exposed as the mastermind behind a human trafficking empire that had evaded justice for years. For years, the FBI task force had focused solely on Harrison and his shell companies. Suddenly, they found themselves coordinating with Interpol, Europol, and even border protection agencies in countries ranging from Thailand to Romania. New names appeared: operators, recruiters, transport staff, and financial mules. Dozens of secondary arrests followed as connections expanded. Each raid, each seized device, each decoded communication revealed yet another layer of the operation. One of the most chilling aspects of the network was its seamless integration into the infrastructure of seemingly normal businesses. No underground clubs or shady alley dealings, everything ran under the guise of normalcy. On paper, everything seemed legal. Transport companies, antique restoration firms, international buyers and managers. But behind the scenes was a simple exploitation conveyor belt, deceptive recruiting practices. Recruiters often posed as talent scouts or agents. They lured women and young girls with promises of modeling contracts, educational travel, or even marriage. They targeted low-income neighborhoods, especially in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, where hope was often packaged in lies. Once the targets were secured, recruiters handed them off to logistics handlers, intermediaries who specialized in moving people across borders. Fake passports were produced, new identities created, and flight tickets booked under business aliases. Sometimes victims were trafficked in shipping containers labeled as art or antiques. Upon arrival in the U.S., victims were moved through a network of safe houses. These weren't the typical rundown hideouts, but Airbnb properties, clean, quiet, normal-looking short-term rentals and warehouses with surveillance cameras monitoring every corner. Most safe houses had reinforced doors, tinted windows, and alarm buttons, not to protect the victims, but to safeguard the managers in case authorities showed up. Victims were often drugged, disoriented, and isolated. Their phones and personal belongings were taken, cutting them off from the outside world. Their new reality was one of control and conditioning. They were taught phrases to repeat, instructed on how to smile in public. They were told that if they ran, they'd be killed. If they spoke out, their families would suffer. Who orchestrated all of this? Investigators linked Rick Harrison to dozens of communications with known human trafficking coordinators. Ledgers found in his warehouse contained names matching those arrested overseas. In some recorded phone calls, Rick discussed delivery timelines and refunds using terminology later confirmed by the FBI as consistent with the language used by trafficking rings. The scope of the operation was terrifying. Law enforcement estimates show that over 180 individuals were trafficked through networks linked to Harrison's companies from 2017 to 2022. Most were girls aged 12 to 20, some never to be found. Rescued in different states, abandoned when law enforcement pressure became too much, the pawn shop served many functions in the network. On the surface, it was a tourist attraction, but deeper down, it was a hub for money laundering and encrypted information exchange. Investigators discovered that many rare item transactions were actually fronts for money transfers. An anonymous buyer could walk in and purchase a Civil War rifle for $65,000 without asking, without a background check, without real paperwork. That money would then be transferred to accounts in Europe or converted into cash for the delivery of a new victim. More chilling evidence came from intercepted email threats. A message from an intermediary working for Harrison's logistics company described a successful delivery. RH is very happy with the girl, silent and well-behaved, arrived in one piece. Compensation was forwarded. This transactional language made everyone in the courtroom feel uneasy. It revealed that the network had no room for humanity, just profit, efficiency, and compliance. The money laundering aspect of this operation was as complicated as fake invoices, ghost employees, and fake sales. It was all part of Rick's ecosystem, his various businesses, each with a different function, one for transport, one for intake, one for storage, and one for marketing. Each business was registered under a different name, often with minimal oversight or regulation. Some businesses were registered offshore, in locations known for lax financial oversight. Money flowed through Vegas casinos, often broken into smaller deposits to avoid reporting thresholds. Federal investigators flagged withdrawal patterns matching known money laundering operations. A shocking discovery showed Rick withdrew $37,000 in cash from 5 different ATMs over a 48-hour period, each withdrawal exactly $7,400, just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic federal reporting. Even more concerning was the hidden client list in the ledger. Agents found initials, dates, and encrypted entries matching buyers in the US, Europe, and Asia. These weren't just criminals. Some were entrepreneurs, diplomats, artists. Names had been redacted in official reports, but were later leaked in secret forums and rumors near the courthouse. Rick wasn't just a trafficker, he was also a broker for the elite. His connections bought silence, his reputation bought trust. For years, Rick's network operated publicly disguised as the charm of reality TV and the hustle of an entrepreneur. What truly shocked authorities was how long it had gone undetected, despite operating for years, involving hundreds of victims and generating millions of dollars. The system survived because it hid behind layers of legality. No obvious red flags, no clear paper trail. Everything was wrapped in commercial language, just another transaction, another rare item sold. Just one mistake, a receipt, a missing girl, was enough to start peeling back the glossy surface and expose the rot beneath. This network caused a global ripple effect. Law enforcement actions in Europe and Asia were carried out based on Harrison. The Interpol investigation issued a warrant, embassies were notified, and a hearing was held in the U.S. Congress on how celebrity-owned businesses could be used as a front for human trafficking. Meanwhile, Rick Harrison sat in a Las Vegas jail cell as agents pulled box after box of evidence from his properties. His empire was collapsing, one lie, one victim, one blood-stained dollar at a time. The final nail in the coffin wasn't a confession, it wasn't a video or an audio recording, it was a book. A single leather-bound ledger discovered in the most unexpected places. Buried behind drywall in a private office at one of Rick Harrison's warehouses in Las Vegas. It wasn't found by chance. The FBI had been searching for a central record, a master list suspected to link the loose ends of the sprawling operation they had been digging into. Devices, email storage, vaults, and even private safes. But what they were looking for was always just out of reach. Until they tore down the wall in the back of a temperature-controlled storage room. The agents acted on a tip from one of Rick's former associates, a disgruntled warehouse manager who accepted immunity in exchange for cooperation. He claimed Rick had a personal habit of recording everything, not in spreadsheets or databases, but by hand, the old-fashioned way. The man said he didn't trust digital records because they left too many traces. That comment led investigators to reassess Rick's personal property in a whole new way. When they arrived at the East Sahara Avenue storage facility, registered under one of Rick's shell companies, they went deeper. The space looked like an overloaded antique vault, stacked from floor to ceiling with vintage furniture, unopened crates, rusty signage, and piles of what appeared to be souvenir junk. But behind one of the display shelves holding unopened coin boxes, an agent noticed a seam on the wall that didn't match the building's design. The team ripped apart the drywall. What they found was a small, sealed compartment hidden behind the plaster wall, covered with a thin layer of soundproofing. And inside, untouched, was an old, cracked black leather ledger, unmistakably worn from handling. The agents didn't touch it at first, opting to take photos on site. They scanned the surrounding walls for fingerprints, fibers, and any potential traps. Only after taking every precaution did they retrieve it and send it to the lab. But the book didn't require digital enhancement or special lighting to reveal its horror. The neatly written cold handwriting inside. Clearly, each page was a record, each entry a life reduced to a few lines. There were over 230 entries in total. Each entry followed a similar format: ID number, date obtained, gender and age, condition, country of origin, final destination, handler name code, payment status. A sample entry read, number 073, June 18, 2020, gender age, female 15, condition, docile, non-English speaker, origin, Ukraine, destination, Miami, JD, handler, gloved fox, payment, $42,000, received, customs pending. The agents could hardly believe what they were seeing. The entries were organized in an utterly dehumanizing manner. They could just as easily be inventory notes for imported electronics, but these were young, underage people. And Rick Harrison had personally written each entry along with notes, some marked with asterisk indicating high-end clients. Others had notes like returned, declined, buyer refused, replaced, or most haunting of all, removed. When this ledger was presented as evidence, even seasoned prosecutors struggled to read it. The content was read aloud, but it was necessary, undeniable. Unlike encrypted emails, anonymous money transfers, and circumstantial testimony, this ledger was tangible evidence showing Rick Harrison didn't just know about the trafficking network. He had recorded, managed, and overseen it like a business portfolio. Handwriting experts confirmed the entries matched Rick's known writing samples. Analysis confirmed dates matched travel records, financial activities, and missing persons. Every entry was verified. As each line from that book was read into the court record, the attitude of the jury shifted. Some looked angry, others trembled, some cried. But one thing was clear: no one saw Rick the same way anymore. And that's not all. In the back cover of the book, scribbled between pages full of numbers, was a loose diagram of what investigators later called the routing funnel. It outlined the process from recruitment to transit to safe houses, connecting code names to countries, cities, and drop points. There were references to port authorities, bribes to alternative airports, and private runways. Some airports were ambiguous, off-the-record landing zones, and there were remote desert locations in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, all pointing to a logistical network far bigger than anyone had previously trusted. Then there were the initials, pages upon pages of client abbreviations with a list of specifications required. Next to each specification was a list of age, language, and physical descriptions. Some demands. silence. Others demanded compliance. One entry even requested orphaned children, no trace. Prosecutors later explained that these buyers weren't just local traffickers. They were international clients potentially connected to dark web markets and blacklisted auctions in jurisdictions that were untraceable. Rick was their supplier, their portfolio manager, their broker. What horrified many wasn't just the content of the ledger, but its tone. No shame, no hesitation, no effort to disguise it through euphemisms or gray areas. The business language was clear and cold. Rick wrote these notes with the same detached professionalism he used in front of the cameras when appraising a Civil War rifle or a vintage Rolex. The public reacted with a mix of skepticism and outrage. The media, which had once hailed Rick as a business success icon, now tore him apart. The very fans who once waited for hours outside his pawn shop turned their backs in disgust. Online forums flooded with conspiracy theories, outrage, and calls for deeper investigation. The phrase "ledger in the wall" became shorthand for betrayal, because evil was camouflaged right in front of their eyes. But the full truth about how long the ledger had existed and how many people helped keep it secret is still the subject of an ongoing investigation. Court documents reveal that at least 2 former business associates of Rick had seen the ledger and said nothing. One witness said he believed it was a customs log for European antiques and never questioned why the entries used codes instead of item names. Another claimed he asked Rick about it once and was told, "It's insurance for the people trying to deceive me." Insurance, which, as prosecutors later confirmed, wasn't just a record, but leverage. A way to control silence, a tool to ensure no one crossed him without consequences. What became of the ledger after it was presented in court? It was placed into federal evidence storage under strict classification. Only a few pages were publicly released, heavily redacted, with details about victims obscured. But the full content continues to be reviewed. As authorities uncovered connections to missing persons cases across multiple states and countries, for the families of victims, the ledger represented both horror and validation. The horror of what their loved ones endured, but also the validation that they hadn't imagined it, that their pain had a cause, a name, and a perpetrator. And for Rick Harrison, it was evidence that no defense attorney could explain away, no argument could distort, and no reality TV charm could distract from what was clearly written on those pages. The ledger not only accused him, but also described him as the architect of it all. Buried in the wall after years of lies, it would become the foundation of the prosecution case, a chilling relic of a hidden empire. The final confession from a man who had never spoken a word in court. The tension in the courtroom reached new heights. The media coverage was unrelenting, the public outrage boiling over, and the evidence presented to the jury was heartbreaking. But nothing could prepare anyone for what came next. Neither the ledger in the wall nor the video footage of secret deliveries. Then came the moment when Rick Harrison's son, Corey Harrison, took the stand. Growing up under the bright lights of reality TV and in the shadow of his father in the pawn industry, now he was walking to the witness stand, swearing an oath under invisible scrutiny, emotionally on the verge of collapse. Corey had not spoken publicly since his father's arrest. In fact, he had nearly vanished completely. No updates on Instagram, no appearances on TMZ, no statements to the press. People speculated he was hiding frantically, he was complicit, he was cooperating with the fence. Rumors spread. But Corey remained silent until the day he walked into the courtroom. His appearance shocked the public. The face, once cheerful, slightly sarcastic, known to the public through Pawn Stars, now looked gaunt, weary, and deeply haunted. His eyes swollen from sleeplessness or from crying before testifying. His hands shook as he swore the oath, his voice catching as he confirmed his name. Corey Harrison, son of Rick Harrison. He paused after speaking, as if those words themselves caused him pain. The prosecution began gently asking basic questions about his role in the pawn business and his relationship with his father. Corey explained that he had worked at the shop since he was a teenager, starting with sweeping floors, later managing inventory, and finally appearing on the hit reality show. You won't believe the shocking evidence revealed in this case. This is no longer Pawn Stars, this is raw, unfiltered truth. Don't miss this jaw-dropping story. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on every twist and turn. Share your thoughts in the comments and join us in uncovering this mystery. But hidden beneath these rehearsed details was something much darker that he had yet to reveal to anyone, even his closest friends. The prosecutor leaned in and asked, "Did you ever suspect that your father was involved in anything illegal?" The room fell silent. The camera zoomed in on Corey's face. He hesitated, his eyes darting around the courtroom before looking down at the floor. I didn't want to believe it," he said quietly. "But I did suspect." The confession was staggering. Until now, no one close to Rick had publicly accused him. Corey, his own blood, was the first. The prosecutor allowed a long silence before continuing. "When did you start suspecting?" Corey took a deep breath. "Around 2019, things started to change." It became strange when meetings took place after hours that I wasn't allowed to attend. My father started traveling more but never explained why. He became paranoid and installed new security cameras everywhere, even in illogical places like his private office and the back hallway. When I asked about it, he only said it was for insurance purposes. He described how the pawn shop underwent sudden renovations. One day I came in, and the entire basement was being remodeled. He hired outside contractors, paid them in cash, and didn't tell anyone why the renovation was necessary. He said we were building a new vault to store high-value items, but that vault was never used to store anything we sold on the floor. Then things started to fall apart. One night, Corey stopped by, tears streaming down his face. He was late for inventory, and he heard voices from the back. Not just one voice. Dad often had late meetings, but this time it was different. He heard crying like a child, and he swore that for a moment he thought he was imagining it. He moved towards the noise, but the back hallway door was locked. He called, but no one answered. He froze, trembling. The next day, when I brought it up, he looked me in the eye and said, "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." That was the first time I was scared of him. The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorneys seemed to tremble. Rick sat just a few feet from his son, not blinking. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, arms folded, refusing to look at the boy he once raised in the shop. Corey continued, explaining how his father's attitude changed over the following year. He became more secretive, more controlling, less trusting. He stopped letting me be involved with the company's accounting. I had access to the shared drive for payroll and sales, but one day that drive disappeared. The password changed. I asked, and he said, "You're not ready to handle that responsibility." That's ridiculous. I've been running half the store for years. Then came the final moment, the moment Corey says changed everything for him. There was a package that was mislabeled. It was supposed to go to our warehouse, but somehow it ended up on the main store floor. It was sealed tightly, but it rattled. I thought it was coins. I opened it out of curiosity. He choked up, covering his face for a moment. The judge suggested he take a break, but Corey shook his head. When I opened it, I found a smaller locked box, one of the block containers. Inside, there was a briefcase with photos, not antiques, not artifacts. They were photos of young girls with coded names and stamps, as if they were inventory cataloged. One juror gasped, another covered their mouth. I confronted him. Corey said I asked him what it meant. I shuddered, thinking maybe it was some terrible joke, but he just looked at me and said, "Box it up and forget what you saw." And then he left. He didn't try to explain. He didn't deny it. He just left. That night, Corey packed his bags and left the house. He quit his job at the store right after cutting off contact, stopped filming the show, and moved out of state. The world thought it was a business dispute, creative differences, exhaustion from the reality TV show. But now the truth had been exposed. Corey ran from a secret that broke his heart. When questioned, Rick's defense attorney tried to deny Corey's claims, suggesting that Corey had argued with his father and was now seeking revenge. "If you suspected all this in 2019, the defense asked, "why didn't you go to the authorities back then?" Corey looked down and then up again, tears on his cheeks. "Because I didn't want to believe my father was a monster." And with that, the courtroom shattered. Reporters outside relayed every word. The news anchor paused mid-sentence to handle the emotional weight. Across America, former fans watched in silence. It was no longer just about Rick's guilt, but about how those around him, his family, his employees, his son, were also victims of another form of manipulation. Corey stepped down from the witness stand in a silence louder than any applause. No one spoke, not even Rick. The Harrison family, once proud, was torn apart before the eyes of the world. And Corey, a man raised in front of the cameras, had exposed something far more real, raw, and heartbreaking than anything reality TV could script. Long before the FBI raided the pawn shop, before revelations in court, and even before the public began questioning Rick Harrison's actions, there was one man who suspected something was wrong. His name was Austin Russell, but the world knew him as Chum Lee. Chum Lee was the comic relief on Pawn Stars, lovable, goofy, and often the butt of Rick and Corey's jokes. He was the underdog, beloved by fans. People admired his easygoing personality, his surprising knowledge of pop culture, and his willingness to admit when he didn't know something. But behind the scenes, Chum Lee observed more than most people thought. He wasn't just a sidekick. He was a witness, and his testimony would add a chilling layer to a case already steeped in darkness. The prosecution called him to the stand, not because he was a key player in Rick's business dealings, but because he was one of the few who had been present during the years when the trafficking operation was active. Chum Lee had witnessed the absurdity at the time, but looking back, he felt disgusted. When he stepped into the courtroom, there was an unprecedented tension. Unlike Corey, who was clearly broken, Chum Lee was ready to face the truth, though his emotions were still heavy. Chum Lee entered with a serious determination. He looked like a man who had kept a secret for years and was finally ready to let it go. As he sat down and adjusted the microphone, the room seemed to lean in toward the prosecutor. The prosecutor began by establishing Chum Lee's relationship with Rick. "How long have you worked at the pawn shop?" "Since I was a teenager, nearly 20 years, Chum Lee answered. And during those 2 decades, he had worked closely with Rick Harrison. "Yeah, he was my boss like family. Actually, I practically lived at the shop during filming seasons." The questioning shifted to the period from 2018 to 2022, now known to coincide with the peak of the human trafficking operation. That was when Chum Lee's attitude changed. His eyes narrowed, his answers became slower, more thoughtful. There were nights Rick would come in after hours. He'd say sometimes 2 to 3 a.m. He'd bring people who weren't buyers, weren't collectors, people I didn't recognize. They never talked, they never looked at anyone, they went straight to the back. The prosecutor asked, "What kind of people were they?" Chum Lee hesitated. "Mostly women, the sound of children crying." Sometimes it echoed throughout the courtroom. The judge requested silence, but the emotional weight in the room was too much to overcome. Chum Lee continued, unfazed. "At first, I didn't think much of it. Rick had strange customers. He was involved in all kinds of transactions, but then I started noticing patterns. Same truck, always with tinted windows, same driver, always parked in the alley, never in the parking lot. And then what about the code? He would call the receptionist from the back room and say, 'Make sure item 27 is secured.' It's really odd that we didn't have item 27 in the inventory. I checked once out of curiosity, but nothing was listed." "And did you ask him about it?" the prosecutor asked. "Yeah," Chum Lee said. "I joked. I said, 'Hey, Rick, what's item 27? Some kind of alien artifact?' He didn't laugh, just stared at me and said, 'Don't joke about things you don't understand.' That was the first time I saw him tense up." The courtroom remained silent. Even Rick, who had kept his indifferent attitude throughout Corey's testimony, shifted slightly in his seat. That subtle reaction was noticeable, the kind you see when someone knows the walls are closing in. Chum Lee continued to describe an event that had haunted him for years. "One night in late 2021, I was leaving through the side exit and I heard banging. It wasn't like tools or equipment. It sounded like fists hitting metal. I followed the sound to the old storage room connected to the back hallway. The lock was open, but there was someone inside. I heard crying. Their voice choked. I went to Rick the next morning and told him what I heard. I thought maybe someone was hurt. Maybe we had been robbed. He told me flatly, 'You didn't hear anything. Don't bring it up again.' He was cold as ice." The prosecutor paused before asking the next question. "Did you ever consider reporting it?" "I did consider it," Chum Lee replied, "but I had no proof, just a feeling. And let's be real, I was the clown of the show. Who would believe Chum Lee? I didn't even understand what I was seeing." He paused and looked toward Rick, but I should have told. The prosecutor leaned in, silent. "What made you decide to speak now?" Chum Lee took a deep breath. "The ledger. When I heard about the ledger, everything clicked. The delivery sounds, the rooms, the girls. Everything made sense. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. I was part of that place. I worked under that roof. I feel like I owe those people something, even if it's too late. During cross-examination, the defense tried to discredit Chum Lee by bringing up his past legal troubles, specifically a 2016 raid at his house where drugs and weapons were found. But Chum Lee remained calm. "Yeah, I messed up," he admitted. "I made dumb choices, but I never trafficked anyone, and I'm not staying silent anymore once I knew what was really going on." The jury watched him closely. This was no longer about awkward humor. They remembered that this was a man who had witnessed something horrific, lived with it, and was now standing in the light to face it head-on. As Chum Lee stepped down from the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted once again. Another domino had fallen. Another person from Rick's inner circle had broken their silence, and now the public story had been reinforced. This was not a smear campaign. This was not a setup. This was the truth. And those who had once been closest to Rick were now the ones helping to bring him down. Human trafficking might be the most shocking aspect of the Rick Harrison case. But it didn't exist in a vacuum. To move bodies across borders, to pay drivers, to silence handlers and transport victims under fake identities, there had to be money, and a lot of it. But more importantly, the money had to move invisibly and quietly, without attracting the attention of tax auditors, financial institutions, or federal regulatory agencies. That's where the other half of Rick's empire came into play. Federal prosecutors revealed in court that Rick Harrison's money laundering infrastructure was just as sophisticated and carefully designed as his human trafficking network. What made it even more troubling was how seamlessly it blended into his public persona. Rick had operated a pawn shop years ago, antique businesses, and starred in a successful television show. These legitimate fronts provided the perfect cover for the dirty money flowing just beneath the surface. One example detailed in court involved the fake sale of a 19th century African tribal mask. On paper, the mask was purchased by a European collector for $83,000, but when agents tracked the item, they discovered it never existed. The buyer was listed as H. Gruber Fine Arts, a front company registered in Liechtenstein. The funds passed through two other companies before being deposited into a bank account belonging to one of Rick's LLCs in Nevada, registered under the name P. A forensic accountant from the Department of Justice named Erin Slade took the stand to present what she called a masterclass in multi-layered money laundering. Slade had analyzed thousands of financial documents, bank statements, wire transfers, vendor payments, and foreign fund movements. She explained how Rick used a network of domestic and international shell companies to launder money from human trafficking under the guise of business consulting, rare collectibles, and antique restoration. At the heart of the operation was a rotating roster of limited liability companies, LLCs, each designed to play a specific role in the laundering process. One company might issue fake invoices for consulting work. Another would receive international transfers labeled as antique purchases, and another would sell rare items that never actually changed hands. The key was the illusion of movement, money being transferred from one account to another with seemingly reasonable descriptions. Slade called this transaction layering, a technique in which money is passed through multiple stages via various accounts and businesses to obscure its criminal origin. When it surfaced on the other side, it appeared clean and untraceable. The O-Box is maintained by a third-party authorized director, another example involving antique weapons. Rick's shop is famous for its collection of old firearms, so when $40,000 appeared in his books from the sale of a Revolutionary War musket, no one initially suspected anything. But when investigated, agents discovered that the musket had never been on the shop floor, with no appraisal, no transaction photos, no proof of shipping, the only record being the invoice and a large cash withdrawal within 24 hours of the deposit. It wasn't just the fake transactions driving this operation. Casinos play a key role in Las Vegas, with their large infrastructure becoming a crucial part of Rick's money laundering operation. Federal agents discovered that he frequently bought chips with dirty cash, played low-stakes games for hours, then exchanged the remaining chips for cash, now considered legal income. A surveillance record showed Rick visiting 10 different casinos in 1 month, withdrawing about $350,000 in chips, exchanging $312,000 at the casino. By their nature, casinos have high thresholds for cash transactions and minimal oversight on mid-range chip exchanges, especially from high-status locals. Rick exploited this, using his celebrity status as a buffer with casino owners and floor managers. He was just another high-stakes player for the federal government, a financial ghost moving large sums without leaving a trace. Another part of the money laundering scheme involved real estate. Rick and his shell companies had bought numerous commercial properties across Nevada, some under his name, others under aliases or trusts. These properties were often flipped quickly at suspicious times. In one case, a warehouse purchased for $190,000 was sold 3 months later for $465,000 to a company in Malaysia, an entity the FBI later linked to child trafficking rings. The company never used the property, leaving it vacant for months before selling it back at a loss. In other instances, properties were rented to LLCs he created, giving the illusion of commercial activity. A building in Henderson was allegedly rented to Silver Age Restoration, a company said to be in the antique furniture business. In reality, no such restoration had ever occurred, and the address was even unmarked. Neighbors testified in court that the building was always locked and never illuminated. Rick's laundering also involved the use of art paintings, sculptures, and classic posters. These items are known for being easily overvalued and scrutinized. Slate explains how fake appraisals were submitted to justify six-figure transactions for art pieces that were either worthless knockoffs or didn't exist at all. In one documented case, a painting listed as a Picasso 1914 sketch was sold for $120,000 through one of Rick's shell companies. When experts checked the image, they discovered it had been printed from an online archive and artificially aged using tea stains and sandpaper. For the IRS, however, it was art income for the international buyer, a cover for moving illegal money. The court was also presented with internal communications between Rick and a person only known as HK, suspected of being a financial contact in the Cayman Islands, with emails discussing the effectiveness of offshore shipping. The strategy and a particularly condemnable line of the ledger will maintain the main network running all large volume funds through RH consults to minimize risk. That single line confirmed what the prosecution had argued from the start. Rick didn't just use these systems, he designed them. The trail of money spread far to Singapore, Dubai, Cyprus, and Panama. A network analysis showed that over $12 million flowed through Rick's various companies over 5 years, with over $3 million. $8 million was not accounted for in tax returns or recorded sales. At the end of Slade's testimony, the prosecution presented a diagram mapping Rick's financial empire, dozens of company names, arrows running between them, dates, transaction amounts, and destinations with Rick Harrison at the center of the map. Everything branches out from him. Every transaction leads back to him. The defense had no way to unravel this. They argued that Rick, being a famous entrepreneur, often delegated financial oversight and could not be expected to personally verify every transaction. However, the emails, signatures, and detailed knowledge shown in Rick's own notes made that argument meaningless. He wasn't careless, he was meticulous, he kept records, and he tightly managed high-value transactions. He signed off on transfers, and the numbers don't lie. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of this entire money laundering operation was not its scale or complexity, but the fact that it existed so publicly. Rick laundered money through businesses everyone knew and trusted. He used pawnshop ledgers, invoice records, and even did it on camera. These agreements hid the trail of money. Viewers watching him haggle over a Watu helmet had no idea that behind the scenes, thousands of dollars were being funneled across borders through foreign banks and ultimately funding human trafficking. By the end of this section of the trial, the jury not only saw Rick as a human trafficker, but also as a financial mastermind who turned every modern tool of commerce and entertainment into a weapon to cover up unspeakable crimes. And that money, no matter how clean it seemed, carried a bloody price. The search warrant for the pawn shop was executed with precision. Federal agents, escorted by local law enforcement, raided the gold and silver pawn shop early in the morning as the city woke up. At first glance, it looked like any other police sweep, but this wasn't an ordinary sweep. It wasn't about permits or unpaid taxes. It was about uncovering a physical space. The agents had only heard whispers of a hidden room deep inside the pawn shop, vaguely alluded to by former staff members and hinted at within Rick's operations. Harrison's handwritten ledger was being searched for something that victims and insiders referred to as the room. It was not in the original building plans. It did not appear on the city permits or zoning records filed with the public. The pawn shop is a maze of display counters, vintage signs, and customer service counters. Behind the scenes, there are a few private rooms, Rick's office, a security station, a break room, but this room doesn't belong, yet it is very real. The search began behind the storage hallway, behind an area typically used for inventory overflow and items waiting for appraisers. There was a strange architectural inconsistency. One of the walls seemed deeper than necessary. A few taps revealed hollow spots. They didn't take long to find a creaking board which opened when pressed. Right behind it was a steel door without any insulation and completely soundproof. When agents broke through, what they saw made even grown men recoil. Inside was a small, windowless space, about 10 ft by 12 ft, stifling air, with dim light filtering through a series of overhead LED strips, emitting cold, sterile light. The room had no furniture in the traditional sense, no table, no chairs, no decorations, Just a camera mounted in one corner pointing downward, and in the center of the floor, screwed into the concrete, was what appeared to be a holding bed with heavy restraints at each corner, stained and fixed with thick leather straps. The walls were lined with soundproof foam, not for aesthetic purposes, but to silence. No screams, no cries, no sound could escape. Relying against a wall was a metal cabinet. Inside, agents found several labeled containers, each containing syringes, cotton swabs, and sedatives, along with gloves, ties, and chemical restraints. In the corner was a small portable toilet obscured by a curtain, with no windows, no ventilation, other than a hidden vent behind the foam. The whole space resembled a high-security holding cell designed not to imprison, but to make people vanish. Next to the bed was a shelf with a series of manila folders, each labeled with dates and what appeared to be aliases, such as June, Daisy, and Eliza. Inside the folders were photographs, each showing a girl, most of them young, possibly around 14 years old, maybe younger. Some were crying, others clearly drugged. Each photo had a timestamp, and each file was marked as processed. The agents stopped at the room, not just as evidence, but as a crime scene. One of the agents who entered first later testified that he had to step out after 5 minutes. "I've served 20 years. I've witnessed murders, stabbings, human trafficking. But that room wasn't just about what happened there. It was about what it was designed to do. It was built intentionally to break people." The FBI brought in a forensic team. Every inch of the space was cleaned, photographed, and documented. Under ultraviolet light, stains appeared along the floor and baseboards. DNA testing later confirmed many records, most belonging to known victims, but some unidentifiable who may never be found. A second smaller but equally terrifying hidden room was discovered behind a false shelf in Rick's personal office. One of these contained dozens of digital storage drives, some carefully labeled by year. It was there that agents found hours of recordings, video files dated and indexed in corresponding folders to entries in the ledger. Each file was encrypted, each recorded activity from inside the first hidden room. Some videos showed victims arriving blindfolded, escorted by handlers. Other videos showed them lying motionless, perhaps drugged. These were not grainy surveillance tapes. These were high-resolution recordings, meticulously documented about every moment. Rick had created a treasure trove not just to store people, but to study them. The footage was never shown in court because it was deemed too horrifying to be made public, but it was verified after closed court proceedings and authenticated by forensic experts. Some victims, now adults, were brought in to identify themselves in the footage. One woman collapsed during the trial. Another said she had erased her memory completely until she watched the video. "He told me it was just for inventory," one of them said tearfully. "He said that." The policy was to record the goods. "I didn't realize he recorded everything, even when I cried, even when I begged." Inside that room, Rick Harrison committed what the prosecutors later described as an industrial crime. He did not act in panic. He did not lose control. He designed a system, a space, and a protocol to turn people into inventory. The level of planning, precision, cold indifference. It was even worse than the actions themselves. News of the room spread quickly when rumors emerged that federal agents had discovered what the media called the holding room. Journalists surrounded the courthouse. Protesters began gathering outside the pawn shop with signs that read, "This is where they were held," and "Justice for the victims." Online forums exploded with speculation. Some believed there were more rooms like this, possibly in other properties Rick owned. Others called for the store to be permanently shut down and the Pawn Stars show to be canceled. The show was removed from all major streaming services within 24 hours. In an emergency meeting of the Las Vegas City Council, officials discussed revoking all licenses related to the Harrison name. But for the victims, that wasn't enough. They wanted more than closure. They wanted the truth. They wanted the world to know what that room really was. It was not a film studio. It was not a money vault. It was not the legacy of a misunderstood businessman. It was a prison, a factory, a place where innocence was stolen, recorded, and erased. One of the final pieces of evidence related to this room came from a note hastily written on a sticky note found next to a computer storing video footage inside Rick's home. The handwritten note read, "Ensure all data is recorded cleanly and quietly uploaded to the secure channel before transfer." The sticky note that the prosecutor held up in court summarized everything. Rick Harrison was not a man who made mistakes. He was not a man who fell into the hands of bad people. He was the architect of a system that treated people like objects. The hidden room deep within a place once visited with excitement and curiosity was at the heart of his empire. When the world first heard of the human trafficking accusations against Rick Harrison, money laundering, and unlawful detention of many people, it was all recorded and erased. Money laundering, unlawful detention of many people. No one wants to believe that the man who smiles on screen, the eccentric pawn shop owner, the one haggling over baseball cards and signing autographs for fans, could be behind something as monstrous as this. The evidence is damning. The ledger, the hidden room, the surveillance footage. But for some, the evidence still feels abstract, cold, distant. It all changed the moment the victims spoke up. They are not just numbers in a ledger. They are not just anonymous entries or background noise in the courtroom. They are real people. When they tell their stories, everything, the horror, the cruelty, the intentional nature of the crime, takes on a new, undeniable weight. 4 women testified, only one of whom appeared in person. The others gave their testimony via secure video links from protected locations. All of them were in their 20s, but each had been kidnapped between the ages of 13 and 16. Their names were kept confidential from public court records. They were only referred to as victims A, B, C, and D. Victim A was the first to speak. Her face was partially covered by a privacy screen, but her voice echoed through the courtroom with an eerie clarity. She described how at 15, she was lured away from her home in Moldova with the promise of a modeling career. A woman posing as a representative promised her a photo shoot portfolio in Los Angeles. Instead, she was taken to Las Vegas and straight to what she described as a cold, concrete room. The door locked behind her, and she never saw the woman again. "I didn't know where I was," she said. "I couldn't speak the language. I thought it was a mistake." Then the man walked in and she stopped. her breath changing. It was Rick. He looked me up and down as if I were furniture. He said, "You'll be fine, just follow the instructions and don't make a fuss." The courtroom was silent. No papers rustling, no footsteps echoing. Everyone was stunned as she described her first night in the hidden room behind the pawn shop. She talked about being tied to the bed, the smell of the room, the soft hum of the lights, and the ever-present camera. "I don't understand why he never asked me anything, never explained anything. I just stayed there." She spent 8 days in that room, fed twice a day, sedated when she cried too loudly, watched constantly, never spoken to. On the 9th day, she was blindfolded, put in a truck, and taken to a private runway from which she was sold to another handler. She was eventually rescued in a raid by Interpol in Paris 2 years later. Victim B's story unfolded in a similar manner. She was abducted from a bus station in Arizona after running away from a troubled foster family. A man had offered her shelter for the night and promised to help her return home. Instead, she was sold to a human trafficking ring, directly feeding information into Rick's network. She described being handled inside a warehouse that Rick owned on North Las Vegas Boulevard. They took photos, asked me to smile, told me to say my name slowly. They gave me new clothes and told me I would meet an investor. The investor, she claimed, was Rick Harrison. She remembers his voice, his tone, how he avoided eye contact as if she were beneath him. "I'm 14, she said. He asked me how old I really was. I told him. He said, 'You'll be considered 16. Her voice choked up. At that point, the judge suggested pausing her testimony, but she insisted on finishing. "I need to say this," she said. "People think it was just a mistake, some business deal that went wrong, but he looked me straight in the eye. He knew what he was doing and he didn't care." Victim C's testimony was harder to listen to. It was transmitted through a shaky video link. She sat in a dark room with 2 trauma counselors beside her. She struggled to make eye contact with the camera, and her hands trembled throughout much of her recount. She was 12 years old when she was taken from an Eastern European orphanage, a fake adoption handled by an American couple working as logistical agents for Rick's network. She described being brought to the U.S. on a private charter flight with no passport, no papers, only a fake adoption record and a new name. "I wasn't adopted," she said. "I was bought." She recalled the day she met Rick. It was at a private lot in the outskirts of Las Vegas, one of Rick's lesser-known warehouses. He came in with a clipboard, asked me to stand still and record my height and weight. He said I was small enough to be sent abroad. That's all he said. He didn't look at me as a person. She was held in a secondary location for weeks before being shipped overseas. She wasn't free until a coordinated investigation by human rights investigators in Bucharest uncovered her case. Her story had been buried in bureaucracy until the ledger was found and her code matched, eventually linking her to Rick Harrison. Victim D's testimony was the most haunting. She chose to appear in court, not via video, not from behind a screen. She entered the courtroom, escorted by 2 security officers. Her face was hardened by years of trauma, but still full of determination. She didn't flinch when looking at Rick. She didn't stutter. She didn't cry. She spoke with the calm strength of someone who had waited years for this moment. "My name doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that I survived him." She was trafficked through a series of artist residency programs advertised online when she was 17. She applied to a program she believed was a mentoring program for young painters. However, she was drawn into a loop of fake workshops and eventually taken to an address in Las Vegas listed as an artist collective. "I was taken behind the store," she says. "I remember thinking, this looks like a pawn shop, not an art gallery." Then the door locked behind me. She had been in the hidden room for 4 days, remembering every detail, the lights never turning off, bland food. No one called her name. They referred to her as Unit 3. When Rick walked in, he held a clipboard and told her she was being prepared to go overseas. When she asked why, he said, "Because that's what you're good at." She paused and for the first time looked Rick in the eye. "I want to ask you something, Rick," she said. "Do you remember me? Or am I just another number?" Rick didn't answer. He didn't look away either, but his jaw clenched, fist tightening. Victim D turned to the jury. "There are still many of us. Some of us didn't make it. Some of us are still out there. But I'm here to tell you that this isn't just a mistake. It's not ignorance. It's a business model. And Rick Harrison is the head of the exploding gallery." Supporters of the victims, the press, and the public stood in shock. Silence. Even the judge seemed shaken. No one interrupted. No one looked away when the victims finished their testimony. The atmosphere in the courtroom became heavier, the weight of the truth, not in the form of documents or bank records, but through the voices of those who endured the worst and survived to tell the story. This case is no longer about paperwork, surveillance footage, or financial networks, but about people. Girls turned into numbers, lives reduced to commodities, and a man who built an empire on their backs. And now, the question is no longer, is Rick Harrison guilty? The real question is, what will we do with the truth? Let us know what you think. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe justice is being served, or a 0 if you think there's still more to uncover. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next explosive chapter in this investigation. The story isn't over, and you'll want to be here when the final truth is revealed. See you in the next video.